Hello, my name is Nicole Davis. I'm going to talk about our anti-discrim class for January 6, 2026, when Mary Green came to class and talked about black flourishing in educational spaces, and then Professor Mary Reed's talk on anti-Asian racism in the school system. So I loved both of these talks so much. Oh my God. I thought it was great how Mary Green started by talking about how racism in education is the outcome of an already broken system, and not something separate, but that the system is already broken. And of course, like, students of color and especially Black students are disenfranchised by this system. And yeah, I love it. She actually talked about like ways that we can fight back and our responsibility to be firefighters. So she quoted MLK in saying that, we must be firefighters and put out fires in the building and save the people in it, and that's kind of what teaching is. I definitely have, especially in my practicum, I heard a lot of times my teacher being like, this is a hard job, like, get ready. It's really, really hard, especially when you care about your students. And I think it does make sense that school is a burning building, and we have to save our kids in it, and it's our responsibility and privilege as educators to be able to actually do that. But just getting ready for a very broken system to enter into. Wow, yeah, I learned that the annual cost of a male prison inmate is on average, at least from 2021, was 150,505 Canadian dollars, and then the cost per student in Ontario is $13,834. So $113,000 more is spent each year per prison inmate. And obviously, if that is the priority of our government, we are in a very broken system. And especially since a lot of those disproportionately of those prison inmates are Black, and because they're, Black children are disenfranchised by the school system. And I love, Mary Green talked about some really great resources for teaching about Black Canadian history as well as Black history globally, and her point about how we need to teach Black and Brown history and accomplishments and civilizations, because a lot of white people now believe that those accomplishments were made by aliens, because we're just not taught these things in schools. And it's, they don't believe that Black people, like, there were huge, robust, like, incredible civilizations and accomplishments by people other than Europeans for thousands of years before Europeans were doing anything. And teaching about slave revolts, because we have to combat the Kanyeization of Black history. So the idea that slavery is a choice, we need to be teaching about slave revolts, and how the only reason that slavery did end is because it got too costly and difficult to keep putting out slave rebellions. So that's really important to teach students, and I will. And I'm so glad that we've been learning new things to do. She talked about the statement how Black people experience the most racism in Canada, how the Governor General, I believe, Stephen Lewis, in the report on race relations in Ontario in 1992 made that statement. But this statement is still true today, because and yeah, the school and child welfare systems both work together to police Black families and children, and Black children are disproportionately called, have child welfare called on them over children of other races. And I'd be curious about, the rates with Indigenous children and families. I know that's really high, but yeah, Professor Green was saying that does happen the most to Black children in Canada. So as a future educator, that's something I need to be incredibly hyper aware of, and ensure that I'm not targeting, Black children and families. And yes. She talked about 5 tangible expressions of anti-discriminatory education that foster Black flourishing, including archaeology of the self, which is Celia Ruiz's expression. So constantly interrogating myself, looking at my prejudices and the things that I've learned that are so deeply embedded in my subconscious that I might not understand how it's affecting the way that I see people, especially my future students and their families. So archaeology of the self, especially as a white white future educator, is going to be a very important ongoing part of my work. And adapting the Afrofuturist posture in response to Afro-pessimistic reality. So teaching, about the horrors of slavery and how they have, led and to, ongoing systemic racism, how that manifests in our society today, but also teaching, Black accomplishments and the amazing things that are currently being done by Black people, instead of, the narrative just being about all the horrible things that Black people have endured, which is incredibly important to teach about, and the resilience, but also the amazing things that people are doing and have done, but making sure that Black students can see themselves not just in pain or as victims, but also as survivors and incredibly resilient people who are capable of doing anything and accomplishing incredible things. So that's going to be an important part of being an educator, and making sure that all students of marginalized identities feel that they can do everything and anything. And incorporating UDL into the classroom and rising tide strategies to do the best for all students. Challenging the narrative that only white people can do anything or have done anything. So that's such an important part of teaching Black histories, and also and globally histories of people, of Black and brown and Asian people all over the world throughout history and currently, so that students can see that they can do things, but also especially white students can see that Black and brown and Asian people can do everything, and that they are they don't come to believe that they have any superiority or hierarchy over anybody else. So as a future educator, it's going to be a big part of my job, making sure that I'm not just teaching white Canadian history. I would love to talk more about the dismantling anti-Asian racism talk, building empathy and develop cross-racial solidarity. That's awesome. I'll say really quick, as a Jewish person, this is something I think about a lot. There's this idea, especially in regards to Israel and the genocide in Palestine, that Jews are the exception somehow, and like the worst things in the world have happened to us, so we can, how can anybody say that they are suffering also? Because, the Holocaust is our word. Genocide is what happened to us. No, like, how could we do that to anybody else? How could you say that anything that we're doing is wrong? And, it's so important, clearly, to teach and to build empathy and develop cross-racial solidarity to combat these sorts of narratives. Like, and like Jewish, our future and our well-being is tied to every other oppressed identity. And if we are not trying to uplift and stand in solidarity with all other marginalized groups and see ourselves as the exception, then we will never find freedom. And also, we're turning into the worst people in the world. And I have a lot of opinions about this, but cross-racial solidarity is incredibly important to teach. And, especially historically marginalized people, it's important that we understand the histories of how different minority groups have been pitted against each other in order to ultimately serve the needs and the interests of the dominant social group. So I didn't know this about the model minority myth, and that how the belief that this really became popular in the 1960s, specifically as propaganda, so that to denigrate the struggles of Black Americans and question civil rights legislation. So that was new information for me that I think is very interesting, that I'll definitely be teaching to students, because I think it's a really important connection to make in showing how, all of our struggles are interconnected, and you cannot piece them apart and say that, all of our liberation it depends on each other's. Anyway, thank you so much. Bye.